It is time for Focus on France 24, and today we have a story with overtones of Hollywood police dramas, except that this is for real. You may be aware of an investigation technique called the Mr. Big method. It's existed in Canada for almost 30 years as a way to get suspects to confess to cold case crimes. The idea on paper is simple. The police create a fake criminal gang, implicate the suspect in it until eventually he or she confesses to an old crime. Law enforcement say that it works well, but human rights organisations are not impressed, and in several cases, convictions of so-called Mr. Big suspects have later been thrown out. Pierre Millet and Spencer McNaughton report from Montreal.
This scene took place in early 2016. In this Montreal hotel, Ismail Khabib is in deep conversation with a man whose face has been blurred for this video.
I was happy about the attacks in France, really happy, but personally I wouldn't have done them.
Khabib believes he is talking to the boss of a gang, but he's actually speaking to an undercover cop known as Mr. Big, who has been spinning his web around Khabib for the past 5 months. He's been waiting for this exact moment.
My priority is to defend Syria and Iraq, and to establish Sharia law in these countries.
Finally, Khabib has confessed that he wants to join ISIS. At this point, the police arrest Khabib because of his confession. Khabib will have to go to trial. Khabib's lawyer, Charles Montpetit, is dealing with a thick file. He has to go over the 22 scenarios the police had created over 5 months that led them to Khabib's confession.
Ismail Khabib never thought for 1 second that it was a trap. It's clear that he said what the police wanted to hear. But was this a real or a calculated confession? That's the question.
This is what we call the Mr. Big technique. It's a Canadian investigative operation that was invented in the 1990s. Isabelle Richet is a journalist who reports on justice and the law. She's covered about 10 of these operations, all of which took place in Quebec. The formula is always the same.
It's a very clever investigative technique that consists of taking a suspect down, making him compromise, and then making him confess. These are policemen and double agents who play the villains to get closer and closer to a suspect until they have enough clues that lead them to believe that he's guilty of a crime.
It's a process that brings up ethical questions. Like Khabib, there have been hundreds of suspects who have confessed in the exact same way. Some of these cases made headlines years after, when courts ruled that the confessions were inadmissible. Nelson Hart's story is the most famous case of all. Gander, Newfoundland is one of the most eastern points in Canada. It's the summer of 2002, and Nelson Hart is going for a walk with his twin daughters.
My girls, they were 3.5. This is Karen, and this is Krista.
Jennifer Hicks wasn't worried when Hart took their girls for the walk.
The last time that I seen my girls was when they left with their father and went to a park. But they ended up down in Little Arbor with him.
After a few hours, Hart came back alone. He told his wife their girls drowned and he couldn't save them. 3 years later, even though Hart is a major suspect, the investigation is nearly dead. So the police play their final card and make it a Mr. Big operation. Over 4 months, $400,000 were used to create a fake criminal gang that lured in Hart. Little by little, they used their investigative techniques and eventually got Hart to confess.
When they arrested him, of course, RCMP came to the house and I was cooking. At the time I was doing salmon and stuff. And they never sat me down or nothing. They just told me that they had him and he killed the girls. They got him to confess, and he told me it was all lies, that they tricked him into doing it.
Hart spent 7 years in jail until his lawyers appealed his case and deemed his confessions inadmissible. According to them, the police took advantage of an isolated man who would have said anything just to gain status in the fake gang. In Hart's case, a man named Al Hazlitt played the role of Mr. Big. Hazlitt is also credited with inventing the technique almost 30 years ago. After a few weeks of negotiations, we convinced the retired officer to speak with us over the phone. And even today, Hazlitt still believes Hart is guilty.
My vision of Mr. Nelson Hart murder, and he got away with murder. He told me how he took his daughters down to the wharf, how he pushed them in, and he showed me how he pushed them in using his shoulders.
But would you say that it's a flawless operation?
There could be flaws if it's not done right. Yes, there could be. However, the way the RCMP does utilize this technique with the experienced people, and if the right experienced people are doing it, the checks and balances are in place. The last thing any police officer wants to do is ever go and convict an innocent man.
After the Hart case, the Supreme Court of Canada decided to apply more regulations on Mr. Big operations. Since 2014, confessions obtained this way have to be judged as admissible before being considered as formal proof.